and welcome to our YA edition of Meet the Creator for February 2025. And I've got a bit of a scary one for you this time. I'm very happy to be interviewing Dan Smith about the first in his new series for Barrington Stoke, which is called Deadsoul Project. So welcome, Dan. It's very nice to meet you.
Thank you. It's nice to meet you too.
Now, have you got something prepared to give us a bit of a flavour? I hope it's not too scary.
Not too scary. Yes, I have. And it's sort of I think it's like the sort of what you might call the inciting incident of the book, I suppose. So it's very close to the beginning. And just to give it a little bit of context, the two main characters who we meet at the beginning are Kyle and Lauren, their brother and sister. And they live in a pretty rundown, sort of scruffy block of flats called Alpine Heights, which is supposed to make it sound lovely, but of course it's awful. And they live with their mum and their stepdad, Connor, who they don't really like. He's not really very nice. He's in the army, so he's away quite a lot, which suits them just fine. But we join the story here at the point, and that's really where the book starts, is it starts at the point where they have just found out that Connor has been killed in the sort of line of his duty, in his job. And so their mum's very upset and she's staying with her sister, and Kyle and Lauren have gone back to Alpine Heights to get some bits and pieces from their flat. So this is the point. I'm going to put my glasses on to read this, otherwise it'll be too blurry for me. Okay, so here we go. Okay, so escaping the lift, they trudged along the corridor to flat 11C. As soon as Kyle unlocked the door and stepped inside, he knew something was wrong. He wasn't sure what, but it made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. "Stay here," Kyle whispered to Lauren. "What? Why?" "Just do it," he said, reaching for the rounder's bat that Connor kept by the door in case of emergencies. He gripped it tight and crept along the passage towards the large front room. It was mostly dark in the flat, with just a little light from the city beyond the windows, but it was enough for Kyle to see where he was going. He eased open the door to the front room and peered inside. Like all the other flats in Alpine Heights, 11C was small, with 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom and 1 large front room. The front room was divided by a breakfast bar, separating it into a living room and a kitchen. Right now, the living room was empty. When Kyle looked over the breakfast bar into the kitchen, he saw a shape that shouldn't be there. Someone was sitting at the kitchen table. Kyle took a deep breath to steel himself. "I've got a weapon," he said, raising the bat, "and I'm not scared to use it." The large person didn't move, and the room was in shadow, so it was impossible to tell who it was. "I'm warning you," Kyle said. "Get out or I'll hurt you." The person still didn't move. Kyle edged into the living room, staring over the breakfast bar at the figure sitting in the kitchen. With his right hand still firmly gripping the rounder's bat, he stretched his left hand towards the light switch. When his fingers found the smooth plastic, Kyle flicked the switch and the room burst into light, and his breath caught in his chest. 2 days ago, Mam had received news that Connor Fleming had been on patrol in Belfast when a car bomb exploded right next to him. The army said it had been a massive explosion and that Connor had died instantly. But there he was, clear as day, sitting at the kitchen table. Dun, dun, dun.
And that's the least scary bit, guys. That's the least scary bit. So this is the second series that you've written for Barrington Stoke. The first
one is
amazing
behind me,
Crooked Oak, which is there behind you.
Yeah.
So what's the thinking behind this next one? Is it same sort of age range you're aiming at?
So I would say maybe slightly older.
Mm-hmm.
Although I always find that difficult, when people say what's the age range, because it always depends on the reader and the reader's ability and whatever they've been exposed to, So I would say it's probably a little bit older. I would say that the reading ability would need to be a little bit better, maybe. The books are slightly longer, so they're probably maybe 3 times the length of the Crooked Oak books. And because they're for a slightly older audience, I'm allowed to kill people. So I'm allowed to do much more sort of like horrific things, which is, a lot of fun. And do you know what? I think I think sort of scary things in books and on films and things are kind of a safe way to be scared, I always feel. And, I remember when I was younger reading scary stories, I read stories that were probably, way too old for me, but it just somehow felt more exciting. And that's what we want, isn't it? We want people to be excited by reading. So.
Definitely, without a doubt. The other thing that I loved in Deadsoul Project, I loved the added content because
Yeah, that
it's
was so much
broken up
fun.
with the articles and the diary entries.
Yeah.
That was going to be my question. Was that fun to do?
It was, yeah. And it was because I'd written previously I'd written a historical adventure story which is set in Berlin at the time of the building of the Berlin Wall, and I wrote it in two parts, and one part is a diary from one girl it's about two friends who are separated by the Berlin Wall. So one of them writes a diary and the other one writes letters that she knows her friend will never receive. And I kind of enjoyed building the story in that way. So you get you've got two sides of things. And I thought I'd like to do something like that, to just do something a little bit different. Um, you know, you tend to pick up a book and it's, prose and lines of prose. And it's quite nice to have something that looks a little bit different. It was also something I thought that, the sort of era that we live in, the day and age we live in, where people spend so much time looking at their phones. And I'm very aware that, people's attention span is perhaps a little shorter than it might have been a few years ago. And, people flick through TikTok and they look at something for 20 seconds and then they want to see the next thing and then they want to see the next thing. So I thought if I built the story in sort of smaller parcels and in different ways. So as you say, you get different types of text. So you get some prose, and then a few pages later you might get an excerpt from a file, or you might get a snippet from an interview, or maybe a newspaper article. So it was fun for me to write because I had the opportunity to do lots of different types of writing. I think it's probably good for young readers because they get the opportunity to read lots of different types of writing, and also it breaks the story up, and it means it's maybe easier to read in small bite-sized chunks. If you've only got 10 minutes to sit down and read, you can read like a chunk of the story and know the next bit that's happening.
Well,
If
the
that
other
makes
thing I found for me, which I only realised afterwards, because of all those added things, it almost made it feel more real to me.
Well, it is real.
Well, of course, but it certainly did make the events more shocking because it made it feel more true to life, more real life for me.
Mm.
And as I'm just going on to say, I did find it pretty scary. To be fair, to be
Well, that was sort of the intention, and I did, try to push it, see what I could get away with, and what Barrington Stoke would let me do, and to be fair, they let me do pretty much everything I wanted to, because I wanted them to be scary. I think, see, I love scary stories, and I loved scary stories when I was growing up. For instance, I loved Scooby Doo, and I liked all the ghosts and the monsters, but I was always disappointed at the end when they pulled off the mask and it was a person underneath. How boring is that? I wanted it to be a real monster or, a real alien or whatever. So that's what the Night House Files is going to be about. It's going to be about real scary things.
Well, it has to be said. I mean, I had already had a peek at your Insta. So I
Yeah.
realised that you had already enjoyed reading horror when you were younger.
Yeah.
But something else that shows very much on there is your love of film. And I
Yeah.
felt that the book has got a real cinematic feel to it.
Yeah.
For me, it was almost like reading a screenplay.
That's interesting.
And
Yeah.
was that intentional, or is that just the way you write?
I don't think it was intentional. It's probably just the way I write, or the way I've written these particular stories, I suppose. But you're right to say that I am interested in film. I do love film. I watch loads of films, and that's one of the things I talk about when I go into schools. I talk about how big an influence film is on my writing. I'm a very sort of visual writer. I like to, if I'm writing about a block of flats, for instance, like Alpine Heights, I go and look at blocks of flats and I, find pictures of blocks of flats because it helps me to, imagine them much more than just conjuring it out of nothing. So I am quite a visual writer, I think, and I love films, and I have done ever since I was very young. because like books, you can lose yourself in the stories. Basically, I just love stories. So any opportunity to get any kind of story, I'll take. I watch films, I read books, I play video games. Read graphic novels, anything really. I just love stories.
Well, there were plenty of jump scares there.
And
Absolute
the other
jump.
thing is nobody's safe.
No.
You know, nobody's safe in the story. It's not like, oh well, they're going to be all right because they're the one telling the story. Well, I
Yeah,
don't tell the
I
story
haven't
like that
quite
because you never
forgiven
know.
you for that one. Haven't quite forgiven you for that. That was, yeah, shocking, people. It's very shocking. There's one bit that you really don't expect.
Well, that's good as well, isn't it? I think anything you can do to make people remember it and enjoy it and talk about it. That's why my hope is that kids will read it and they'll be like, oh, have you read that bit? Because
Yeah,
that's what we were like at school. There would be you're talking about James Herbert, and I remember when I was probably like 10 or 11 years old, and we weren't allowed to read those at school. But of course, the books circulated around school, and they were all, crumpled covers and dog-eared pages, and you could tell the pages that people were going to like, oh, have you read the bit where, the rats bite the guy in the cellar or whatever? So, yeah, that's hopefully what young readers will do.
so when can we expect the next title in this series? And are you working on anything else at the moment?
Right, so I can't give you a date,
Right.
but I can give you a rough idea
Hmm.
that we're looking at probably sometime in the autumn. There will be the
Excellent.
second instalment of the Night House Files, and it's called the Wintermoor Lights. And I think there might be a little teaser in the back, actually, of the yeah. So there's a little teaser in the back
Yeah.
of the Dead Soul Project to let us know. And again, the Night Watchman sent me a file and asked me if I would turn it into a story, which I have done. Um, so that'll be out in the sort of autumn time, and we're talking about more, which I would very much like to do because I've got lots more ideas for Night House Files. I mean, if people read them and love them, it could go on and on because I've got loads of ideas. So
Well, I
yeah.
think for me, it really fits into there's a real like niche when you've got kids that have gone up into secondary school and they're in year 7, 8, and 9. They're not always ready to go straight to YA. So it's kind of that young YA in between
Mm,
a YA and middle grade. And this fits perfectly in there. You know,
yeah,
kids that
yeah,
are
I,
year
I
7, 8,
agree
and 9,
that.
they're going to eat it up.
Yeah, I mean, that's fantastic to hear because I agree with you. There does seem to be a little bit of a gap between sort of middle grade and YA, doesn't there? Although, in fact, I've noticed that a lot of middle grade books seem to be getting denser and more complicated, and I do sometimes wonder if they're for adults or if they're really for young readers. I suppose I don't know.
So with your reader hat on now, do
Hmm.
you still get scared by reading horror books? And what's the last book that scared you?
Do you know what? I don't really, and this is something that sort of it kind of disappoints me a bit that I don't get scared, and I watch a lot of horror films as well, and I just don't really get scared by them. I think if anything, I get excited by them, and strangely, I sometimes feel quite comforted by scary stories, and I don't really know why that is. I think maybe when I was much younger, I went to boarding school quite a young age, and I didn't really like it very much. I was quite unhappy. My brother was there as well, and he sometimes used to read scary stories to us in the dormitory. So maybe they have that sort of it conjures that feeling of feeling a little bit cozy, and my brother's reading me a story, so maybe it comes from that. I don't know. However, having said that, if I were to spend the night in an abandoned house in the woods, I'm sure I would, get scared, and all the things that I've been reading about would return to me. I've no doubt about it. It's easy to say I don't get scared when I'm safe at home and warm, and there's no danger, I guess.
Yeah, you see, you're of a stronger constitution than I am, Dan. My
Maybe,
husband finds it very, very funny. He likes quite scary films. I'm afraid
yeah.
he doesn't get to watch them with me. But I'm the sort of book you've written is exactly the sort of thing that scares the life out of me. It's the suspense.
Perfect.
It's that I
Oh, yeah. That's good to hear, and hopefully you'll like the next one as well in that case.
well, I will be definitely reading the next one. I will
Oh, thank
definitely be
you.
reading the next one because my husband was just in fits. watching me read it, because apparently he said I was sat on the sofa and I gradually pulled both my knees up. Sitting on the sofa with my knees up reading this book, and he went, "Are you all right?" And I was like, "Yes." Leave me alone. Leave me alone. I'm just reading. It'll be fine. It'll be fine.
Oh,
Yeah,
I mean, that's so lovely to hear. Thank you. That's great. That's the point.
it is indeed. Now, as I said, this time always flies by, and it has again.
Oh,
But I'd just like to say, once again, I did love it. Absolutely
oh,
love it.
thank
But I'm
you.
never going to forgive you for that last character. That's just not on.
Yeah.
Um, but I'm looking forward to reading the next one. Thanks very much for coming to talk to us, Dan.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Thank you. Bye.